Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and I want to thank you for taking the time to watch my videos. I'm continuing my ongoing analysis into Nietzsche's Will to Power. Excuse me. Sorry about that. I'm continuing my ongoing analysis into Nietzsche's Will to Power. Specifically, I'm going to be looking at section 9 in my notes, and this is going to cover notes 253 to 259 in the text. And with that, let's begin. So this is Will to Power, and this is section 9, and this is notes 253 through 259. Okay, so book 2, part 2, Critique of Morality, section 1, the origin of moral valuations. I think this is actually the beginning. I took a brief hiatus to upload a multi-part series on human rights. So this is the first lecture back from the human rights upload. But yeah, this is the beginning of the, so we're in part 2. We're making good progress because 8.8, section 8.8 on page 42 was book 2, part 1, and now we're in book 2, part 2. So that's good. We're making great progress. Let's get to work. All right. So the origins of moral valuation and the will to power. So we're going to be looking at the roles and the origin of moral valuation. Okay. 1. And I think I said this before, probably a couple hours in the past, as far as the lecture is concerned, that the level of analysis with respect to Nietzsche's Will to Power is, we're going to step it up a notch. I've called it like a second phase of the analysis. The analysis is going to be a little bit more in-depth. You will have had to have watched, I would recommend, a substantial portion, if not everything, up until this point, or you should be versed already in Nietzsche's sort of concepts, because now I'm going to talk a little bit more freely with the jargon, a lot less sort of ghetto philosophy, because at this point we all should be roughly on the same page. We're 28 hours, I think, into the lecture. We're past the halfway point. My initial goal was to do 50 hours. We're approaching 30. So, part 1, or the first point rather, the Hegelian way out. The spirit itself is the, quote, self-revealing and self-realizing ideal. Self-revealing, right? The spirit we're talking about, right? And there's this famous YouTube video, Zeitgeist, right? The spirit of the times, almost, right? The spirit. We'll talk about sort of Geist, but the spirit itself is the self-revealing and self-realizing ideal. The spirit is the self-revealing and realizing ideal. This is important. That is an ideal. The spirit is the self-revealing and self-realizing ideal. Process and becoming. Faith is directed into the future. Right? Process and becoming. I actually want to read this in context. Where's my book? Excuse me. This is note, what note is that? That's note 253. Of course, you guys know I'm using the Walter Kaufman translation. And we're on note 253. We're getting through. I like that. 253. Okay. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is. If you're using this book, page 147, it's note 253, first full paragraph. The Hegelian way out. Following Plato, a piece of romanticism and reaction, at the same time a symptom of the historical sense of a new strength. The spirit itself is the self-revealing and self-realizing ideal. More and more of this ideal in which we believe manifests itself in the course of its process, in becoming. Thus, the ideal realizes itself. Faith is directed into the future. when in accordance with the noble requirements, it can worship. So what we recognize is he, you know Nietzsche. Nietzsche has problems with basically everybody, right? He has problems with Kant. He has problems with Hegel. He has problems with anyone who posits as a consequence of their systematic process of philosophy, an ideal or the highest value, right? Now there are things in Hegel that will be incorporated later, we'll see. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but I'll give you a quick idea of how this goes. We know that with respect to ethics, right? With respect to ethics, we know, as is common knowledge, that there's a distinction between what is the case, right, and what ought to be the case. So that we talk about ethics as the assessment of the distinction between what is and what ought. And we know some of the terms that identify sort of an ethical statement, right? Should, ought, must, have to, so on. Okay, we see that there is a critique, right? Not just of Christian morality, but any morality and any moral ethic for Nietzsche, which is informed by this Christian moral ethic. If we posit, remember I said I'm taking a little bit deeper, so hopefully it's not too, I don't want to go too fast, but then again I don't want to have to rehash a lot. If we posit as our goal, as our ideal, the highest value, that everyone ought to ascribe to one uniform principle, systematized system of belief, Nietzsche says this is invariably going to collapse upon itself. We haven't yet seen what the alternative is, but now what we're doing, and he doesn't say this explicitly, this is actually, you would have to be pretty steeped in philosophy to understand sort of the Hegelian and Platonic incorporation at this point. But what he's talking about is not ethics at this point, actually. He's talking about a discipline known as ontology, and this is the first time that I've discussed ontology in the 27 hours so far. Right, so this is the first discussion of ontology. Ontology roughly makes a similar assessment, an assessment between two sort of polemic halves, right? And what we've seen so far with respect to Nietzsche is that he's attacking polemic binary opposites wholesale. And not even ontology is free from a Nietzschean critique, right? We've seen the is-ought distinction is a little blurred. We've seen how Nietzsche has attacked many differences with respect to morality, immorality, justice, injustice, and so on. It's not as clearly defined as you might think. Why? Because Nietzsche's process is, he has a real, and I love the word, he has a real irreverence for sort of standardized philosophical thought. I imagine Nietzsche, and I had an office mate, shout out to Chris Husbeth, but I had an office mate, we shared an office, quick side note, we shared an office when I was a GA, and Chris had a framed hammer, a physical hammer framed, and it's notoriously that Nietzsche says you have to philosophize with a hammer, and that's exactly what he does. He looks at philosophy and all of these binary oppositions and polemic discourses, which are all fragile and contingent on, multiplicity of contingencies. He comes with a hammer and just starts wrecking it, right? That's Nietzsche. That's why I love him so much. There's a distinction, right? The distinction is the distinction between being and becoming, right? Being and becoming. We are existent things, right? We are existence, we do exist, right? With respect to those of you who know Heidegger, I'm not going to get into Heidegger, this is being with a little b, it's small Dasein, not big Dasein, but I'm not going to explain that, right? So, being, and then we're in a process of becoming, right? And this is sort of this Platonic dualism, right? And this Platonic dualism manifests itself in different versions, in different ways. The distinction between being and becoming, well, let me slow down a little bit, since this is the first time I've ever talked about ontology. I don't want to jump ahead way too fast. But think of it like this, to do a little ghetto philosophy, just to make sure everybody's up to speed, because I don't want to lose everybody now. But real simple. I am Jason Campbell, PhD. There was